What is up, everybody? It is me, Luis Martinez, live and direct from the San Diego Latino Film Festival 2021 Hybrid Edition. Hope everybody's having fun watching movies from the comfort and safety of their own home. And as always, I appreciate the responsibility of doing some of these Q&As with some incredible filmmakers that I'm proud to be exhibiting my films next to. So today, we are going to talk to Rodrigo Reyes, the director of one of the most interesting and complex documentaries I've seen in a long time, called 499. So let's get him on and welcome him to the broadcast.
Hello, everybody. How's it going down in San Diego? Thank you for inviting me.
Where are you at tonight, Mr. Reyes?
I'm in the Bay Area, and but I'm a former San Diegan. Like I lived there when I went to UCSD. I just love you guys, and I wish we could be there in person, and we could be drinking beers and talking about 499 together.
All right. Well, I guess the obvious first question is, what's your favorite taco shop in San Diego?
Oh, I used to go. Oh God, it used to be on 10th. Remember? And like the kids, like they were like Chicano kids, and they would have the biggest burritos, and like their mom and dad would be in the shop sometimes. I haven't been back in a while, but
I know.
you guys know which one I'm talking about? It's right there, like on 10th, like close to Island.
I mean, there's so many good ones that I'm sure somebody will remember which one it's at. Obviously, that's a gotcha question. Sorry about that. We're here to talk about your documentary, 499, which it's curious because I was on a Q&A earlier because we have a documentary in the Frontera Filmmakers Showcase, and they were talking about the 6 different types of documentaries in terms of like how you tell a story, either like the voice of God or just kind of observing it or kind of poetically and stuff like that. And as I watched your film, the first thing that I thought about was that it reminded me of a bunch of different movies, but then also did not remind me of them at the same time. Was it always that complex in your mind when you came up with the concept, or did it evolve?
I wanted to tell a movie about the conquest of Mexico that wasn't just like what you would see on Discovery Channel, like Aztec warrior versus samurai or something like that.
Right.
I wanted it to not be an educational film. Like you could learn something from the movie and you could have an experience, but not didactic, And so we were trying to figure out how to do that. And then a friend of mine said, well, why don't you just like bring back people from the dead and talk to them today and have this like, contrast. And as we started looking into that, I was like, wow, well, like, we have like this character in our culture who's kind of in the shadows of our culture, who's the conquistador, and like he's like the boogeyman. Why not, like bring him back? He's like El Coco, like bring him back and like have him confront like this history that he has helped build, And so the idea clicked, and once it clicked, I knew it was going to work. And I think from that point of view, the film is really documenting something that exists. Like he's a ghost that is real. He's out there, and so many times, like when we see something happening in Mexico, don't we find ourselves asking like, why does this keep happening? It's always like this, that kind of language. And so I think this character lives up, in those corners.
He's like, kind of like a conquistador Ozymandias, kind of like look at what I've done, or kind of like it's because it's almost like a post mortem on the last 500 years.
Yeah, in a way, he's being forced to do something that he never prepared for or thought would happen. He's forced to listen, which is really like in a way very transgressive, because we see day in and day out people asking to be heard, and they're not. But for some reason, this character has been cursed, and he has to listen to these real people who agreed to be a part of the film. So there were a lot of layers, but the idea behind it was like really simple. Like this guy represents history, and he's gonna come and listen to you.
Yeah, definitely not something that you would expect going into, like, okay, this is a story, knowing what the story was about. One of the other things that we talked about earlier in the Q&A is when you're interviewing different people that might have gone through, not might have, but definitely went through traumatic experiences, how the interview process and the filmmaking process might affect them mentally, etc. Obviously, each one of these stories could be its own documentary, right? Each one of them could focus just strictly on that subject. Um, what kind of rules or what kind of processes that you put in place during it to sort of have like the least amount of like effect, or were these people very ready to kind of go through that process and tell their stories?
Well, that's a really great question, because how do you show up, to interview a victim of trauma and say, okay, I'm going to interview you, and there's this guy in a costume that's going to hang out here?
Right.
We had to prepare and to really be transparent. And, I had to share my ideas with folks. And sometimes it took months of talking on the phone, connecting and sharing my concepts with them before they agreed to join the film. And it was a dialogue. It wasn't like, here I am, Mr. Director, hotshot. I show up and I tell you what to do. Like it was a dialogue with a lot of respect. So, for instance, in the third person that the conquistador meets, he meets like this poet, right, who rescues him from the indigenous police. The poet never gives an interview. He just speaks in poetry, and that's what he asked me to do. He felt way more comfortable speaking in his poems than he did trying to like give some kind of talking head interview that he just felt like that wasn't the essence of who he was. So there was always like this dialogue, and people would contribute things, and we would have limitations that they would ask us to consider. And it was just a really wonderful process, because I had never had those conversations with people to that extent, where like we talk for a long time about this before we even show up, and then once we're there, we keep building together and listening to each other. So I'm actually still in touch with most of the folks in the film, and we hope to take it to their communities this summer, because this summer is the 500th anniversary of the actual fall of the Aztec Empire. And we want to do screenings with them if the pandemic allows it, where they can also talk about their stories and share like the bigger picture, because like you said, this is, each person could be a film, and there have been films made about each of these stories, each of these issues.
Yeah, they seem like there's things that we've heard, like either as part of like other documentaries or news stories or things like that, but you tell it in a way where mixed with the sort of fictional character, well, not fictional, I mean historical character, being put in the position to sort of walk a mile in their shoes, so to speak. It adds to to kind of weaving those stories together and showing how the impact of 500 years has on a society. How close to the actual locations? Because I know obviously you're showing the landscapes and showing the things. How precise were you in terms of, the recreation of the path and the locations?
We try to be as precise as possible. So like a great example is when he climbs this like really high mountain and he looks off and he sees another super high mountain covered in snow. Like, to this day, like people associate that mountain of Cofre de Perote with Cortez to this day. He walked through there, he built alliances there, and all sorts of things happened. And the same thing on the beach. And even like when he gets to the trash, the
Right.
trash dump site at the end, that is the actual side of the lake. That's like eastern Mexico City, where the lake once was, and is now covered in filthy trash.
Wow.
So we tried really hard to do that because it adds another layer of interpretation of like, this place was there 500 years ago, and how has it changed, what remains. We really worked on sticking to that route.
When when in terms of the poems and are any of those based on like letters, or is that all based on your creations in terms of like the narrative? Did that come first, kind of like those introductions, those words?
So whenever there's poetry in the film, when he talks about Malintzin, who was Cortez's interpreter, like those poems are actually from another king, that was from a city next to Tenochtitlan called Nezahualcóyotl. That was the name of the prince, and he was like a philosopher prince, and he wrote poetry, and we have his poetry today. The poetry of the actual poet that we see in the film, that's his poetry. But all the rest of the writing is something that I created based on a lot of research and just really trying to understand what actually happened, what did they say happened, and how did they say it, so that we could like feel like we're in the mindset of someone from like the 16th century. Like even the way he sees the world is like completely in his moment, right? Like when he stops and sees Jesus in the marketplace, he's like, like, and he prays because he is that guy. He can pray to Jesus and then go and celebrate his assaults and his battles, because he's completely caught up in that mindset of his time. So that was all thanks to just a ton of research. I got the chance to talk to many of the professors who have been like leading scholars in the field of studying the Conquista, and they all were like really supportive and excited around this project.
Did you run into any major issues in terms of like some people say it happened this way and some people say it definitely happened that way, where you sort of had to make a decision of what you showed, or is there pretty much a consensus now amongst the people that you work with about how things kind of went down?
I think academics always have disagreements, but for me, I feel like in terms of the facts that he talks about, like they're all like pretty much validated. It's obvious that Cortez had help, he had allies, and that those allies were interested in helping him overthrow the Aztecs because they were, the Mexica were an imperial regime. That all that stuff is clear, but then there's also stuff that the character, I think, is like, you kind of have to question it. Is it true or not? Like, what a coincidence that he's the one who gives Cortez all these great ideas, and like he's always trying to put himself in the center of the action, but there's a source to everything that he says or imagines in the film, even to the prophecies that he talks about, that Moctezuma was dreaming and hearing about these things. There's like sources for that, because there were a lot of myths that started coming out around the time of the conquest, and the conquistadores like to pick on those because they like this idea that they were seen as gods, that they were seen as part of a prophecy. They love that because it made them feel so important. I think when we know it's obvious, like there's no way that after 3 years of war that the Aztecs thought these guys were gods, like it's
They figured it out. They weren't Like the Ewoks figured it out with C-3PO that he was
Exactly.
actually a god. um, when because I read a couple of interviews of yours just to kind of prep for this, and you talked a little bit about like the rules that you set for the types of shots that you create. Like the rules, like everything has to be either static or this or that or whatnot. I noticed a lot of real s- like very smooth movement, kind of like just almost. I mean, not a documentary, but like a thin red line type, like Terrence Malick, like very smooth movements to go with the poetry, which is an aesthetic that I love in films, obviously. Um, how far ahead do you sit down and you do that work? Is that like kind of on location thing where you sort of look at what's available to you and what you wanna focus on, or do you have the same rules all the time, or how have you evolved as a filmmaker in terms of that?
I think the rules change depending on the project, you know. So like I'm working on a new film that has completely different rules, and it was made with the same cinematographer, which I hope to share with you guys soon at the festival. And but for 499, like we talked a lot before we showed up about like how are we gonna do this? Why are we gonna do it this way? You know, like the film is shot on these special lenses that create this like really wide image, and so that was like a huge challenge, and we had to be prepared for it. And my cinematographer, he really fought for that aesthetic, and so he helped me build out the rules. And then once we got on location, we started putting them into practice. But I always wonder, like, what is this film going to look like? And it's not just is it going to look cool, but it has to look in a way that connects with what the film is about, right? Like we all appreciate beautiful art, and I think film is like one of the most beautiful art forms because it touches us in so many ways, right? Like it has sound, it has like the cinematography, the acting, all this other stuff, the characters. And so I try to think about that a lot so that I'm ready to make decisions when I show up on location, you know? Otherwise, it would be crazy. We had only like, 6 weeks to make this film altogether.
Wow.
So
The I guess just kind of to go back to what you were saying about him being the person that's sort of telling the stories and putting himself in a place of prominence. Do you think that also kind of comes from nobody being there to challenge him when he's sort of thinking these thoughts? Like nobody is there to tell him, no, that wasn't you, or something like that.
yeah, exactly. And I think like that's what can make the film very disturbing because you're like almost in this dude's mind and you start to think like him. I've had people tell me, you know, I start to question the conquistador inside me. Like, do I have one? How have I contributed to this process? And, like there's something there, but reality keeps, punching him in the face over and over, and his story starts to crumble, as he meets more and more people, right? Like especially the last interview with Doña Lorena, who's a friend of mine now, and she tells this horrific story of feminicide. All of his like myth building just starts to fall apart.
It can definitely be an uncomfortable feeling to sit through, but I'm assuming that you wanted people to, we're not fed little morsels and of this and that and vague. We're given very graphic and intense trauma, and basically told to deal with it, right? So you want your audience a little bit on edge during this. Is it?
Yeah, a little bit. I think it's important to be uncomfortable. The women of Mexico were out in the streets this past week, and look at how they were received, with like giant, 2 meter steel walls, shutting them off and trying to ignore them. So I think like their stories are tough, and we have to face them if we really want to address like what's behind that, right? And so I think that discomfort is important. Like we need to be brave also as audiences and not just expect easy solutions to such huge problems like the ones in 499. I mean, it takes a whole society to address that.
Do you think that or do you leave it up for interpretation, whether the movie ends on a somber note, like to what to think about, um, or do you think that that it that in a way just sort of dealing with that trauma and dealing with it could lead us to a place where we can like move forward from it?
I mean, for me, the film is maybe not a happy one, but I feel strengthened by it because here this man is no longer a ghost. He's no longer haunting anybody. He's just a dude trying to get by, you know. And to me, history is all about like what we do with our day to day, you know, and what do we plan for our future. That's really what history is useful for, you know. Like we can get stuck quibbling about the past, but it matters because we care about our today, you know.
Hmm.
And so I see him like kind of continuing on his journey, but in a way he is not the same as he was at the beginning. He's got a lot to think about and a lot to process.
We had a question. I missed it, I think, before from Jose Cruz, who said, "Qué increíble visión e idea. ¿Qué fue lo que te inspiró para esta película?"
So I was really inspired, and thank you, Jose, for that question. I was really inspired, like, to fall in love with history because of my dad. My dad is was a history teacher in Mexico, and he would take me to visit museums and visit archaeological sites with him. And he always talked to me really serious about history. It was always a big deal, and it was always like leaving me with puzzles to think about. And I feel like that's the root of it, you know. And I was a little kid, I was like 5 and 6 years old, and I still remember those moments, you know. And I that's really where the inspiration came, you know, because as soon as I started thinking, wow, like the 500th anniversary is coming, I knew I had to make a movie about it because somehow like it was like my responsibility as a filmmaker to connect with that reality, you know, of this big cycle that's coming to a close.
Yeah, no, it's a number 500, right? That gets your attention. But yeah, you called the movie 499. So what was that? What was the thought process there?
Um, you know, I think anniversaries sometimes have a really neat packaging. You know, it's like we have 100 years, we have 50 years. There's something broken with this history in Mexico, I think, and I so many people want to see a change. You know, they don't want to see just like a things packaged nicely. There's a big need for change in Mexico and in many other places here in the US too. We have like a need to confront our history, right? And so we need to hack these anniversaries and use them to kind of like dismantle, you know, what they celebrate, you know. So that's where I found that number 499, and it's also a very kind of like disturbing number, you know, like it doesn't sit easy, you know, when you see it.
Yeah, it's not definitely the first thing you're like, let's put that on a poster, you know. Not like the 300 or Indianapolis 500 or something like that, like nice clean numbers. But I can understand where you're coming from. What do you feel about movies that? And then we're live here with Rodrigo Reyes, director of 499. Incredible. I don't know. It's kind of like a genre blending documentary. Uh, that's part of the San Diego Latino Film Festival. If anybody has any other questions, comments about the movie, but go ahead and post them in the chat, and then we'll bring them back up. But just kind of in terms of just your the subject matter of indigenous people, uh, like the way I might feel because I'm Colombian, the way people treat like the most Colombian stories are about drugs and stuff like that, such as Mexican stories too. But something like a movie like a Apocalypto, that's like basically like a chase fantasy set in like an indigenous world like that. How do you feel when about I don't want to say outsiders, but outsiders touching the subject matter and sort of commercializing in it, and what kind of effect do you think that has on people's relationship with our ancestors and stuff like that, and how we feel about them?
I think we're kind of past that time in cinema where you don't just get to float through, you know, a story where you visit someone else's culture to explore your own fantasies, you know. I think that's kind of tired, and there's a lot more people speaking out against those kind of films. At the same time, I remember watching Apocalypto like when it came out, and I went to the theaters and everything, And so it's complicated because here's a guy who dumped millions and millions of his own money to make a film in Mayan languages, you know, a period film at a scale that no one else was willing to invest. And I think that maybe opens up a possibility for for education and collaboration with the industry, where folks, who have that kind of power can empower, you know, people who have a deeper and more personal and stronger connection to stories, so it's messy because, of course, like, that film in particular is very complicated by all these very classic chase kind of structures and all that. But I also see a window of possibility because I always want to believe that we can kind of have a dialogue and build something together, you know but I think it's time for in this case for Latinx directors to step up and be given that forum to tell the stories they want to tell.
Excuse me, sorry about that. Because I guess the ending of that movie is what the beginning, what the name of your movie sort of suggests. Because it seems like here come, we've gotten through this part, and all of a sudden here's this next layer. We have another question coming in from the San Diego Film Festival. Let's see if we can get that up on screen for you. Says from Joel Juarez, in addition to the visuals, the sound design melding into the score was so layered and rich. The police car, graveyard, the airplane covering the bullfight. When and how did the sounds come to you?
That was an entire process of building and building more and more sounds, and working with my friend Pablo, who's a composer, and really like like finding sounds that were not like what you would expect. Like, you could have like a lot of brass and a lot of like epic Hollywood kind of scores, but like, I think what the film ended up going with is like something that's really ghostly. It's like, it feels like you're kind of in his mind, and the world is kind of like, like there's this static or this frequency in the world. And one of the really cool things about the soundtrack is that the composer Pablo built an actual instrument, unique for the movie. He built like a very strange kind of like pipe organ made out of syringes and plastic hoses and stuff. And he would that created like this kind of like, there's a sound in the film where there's like these like kind of like voices that are like whining or like whistling in the wind kind of. And that was him like literally building an instrument for the film. And so we worked really hard on trying to not create sounds that you would expect, but that really fit into the film, and then sometimes enhance like the sound effects of the landscape or the environment, and to like single out like certain things. It isn't just like traffic. It might be like voice, like certain specific voices in the background. And so there's all these layers that we built. And I went down to Mexico City, and we worked for like many days on the project, days and nights on building the soundscape.
Awesome. Did did was that opening shot a day for night when
No,
he's
the opening shot was it's just the color correction took down the lighting, but that was the actual first shot that we shot in the movie. Was the conquistador comes out of the ocean, and we tried to do everything in chronological order so that the actor could also kind of like get into the role, and really like learn as he went, like follow his character as he went.
the so and you shot it in sequence. That's incredible. That's a lot of hard work, man. I think that it shows. I think. Are you still connected, Rodrigo? There you
Yeah,
go. He's
so
back. All right. So, and you shot it in sequence. So, okay, that's good. That's that's awesome, man. When how much control do you take over post production for a project like this? Obviously, they say you write the movie 3 times: when you write it, when you direct it, and when you edit it. Did you have very clear sort of demands on your editors on what you wanted pacing wise, or do you also do that yourself?
So I worked with two editors on this film, and one is a young editor who's coming up. You know, he's building his career, and he's also from Mexico. And then the kind of senior editor is based in Chile. So Daniel and Andrea has worked with folks like Jodorowsky and Pablo Larraín and different really big directors. And so she was kind of like guiding us through this process of trying to build this character. And you know, like the film seems really kind of like straightforward, but it took a long time, like almost a year of editing before we could find the balance between this character and this world, because we had all these other scenes where the conquistador was being very active in the beginning of the film, and we realized, you know, after all this work, that people needed time to feel out, you know, like, and accept him. You know, you needed to kind of like walk slowly into this world. And so there was a lot of like tweaks with the pacing and writing and rewriting of the voiceover. It was a really awesome process because it forced me to go back to all that research I did and keep writing and writing and writing new versions. We had like a version that had like sci-fi elements to it, like constantly referencing like sci-fi,
Wow.
you know. And then we cut all that out. We tried so many things in the process before we got to what you guys were able to see.
Release the Reyes cut, right? We need it. We want to see the 3 hour long version with all the sci-fi and stuff in it. Was it making it too like because I think when you start you're introduced to the character, and you know, he's not talking, he's sort of fish out of water, I guess. But you start asking yourself, is this guy like a Don Quixote type, or is he imagining this? Is he from the past? Is he a space traveler, whatever? So I think, did you think it was when he was doing too many things, that it was too confusing for people, or like you said, people needed to sort of have time to adjust to what the type of story you were going to tell them?
I think it's you know what it is? It's like we're used to time travel being like Bill and Ted, you know? Like funny. And it is funny. Like you bring someone, you know, you bring Genghis Khan or something. Yeah, it's funny. But this wasn't,
Museum.
yeah, this wasn't a funny movie. So you just needed time for people to kind of realize that it wasn't, and that it was like pretty dead serious, you know? As soon as you start hearing the first story with the journalist, you know, who was you know, murdered, like there's nothing funny there anymore. And then you start to accept the film and the conceit of it, you know, like you start to accept this character and that it's about something else. It's not just like the gag of
Right.
seeing someone from another time like messing up today.
Yeah, I can see how people might, because I love nothing more than to watch a movie and not know nothing about it. I just like on a blank canvas. I press play and then I just start absorbing. So I went through an entire range of emotions watching the movie. You know, when, like I said, I was like, "Who's this character? What is this about? Is this, you know, what is this kind of documentary?" Like for a second I was like, is this like Grizzly Man, or is this like this, or is this like that? Like I kept finding different things, and I even talked about it earlier today. You're blending so many types, and then with the fictional character, I mean the historical character, that it really, um it's an incredible ride. So if anybody is tuning in for the QA first, you should know as well that you can still watch that movie. It just finished playing, but you can still order it online as part of the festival, and you'll have 24 full hours to watch the film after you start watching it. And we're live with Rodrigo Reyes. I think Saul has another question here that's coming in. Is there a third person element? Is he Cortez, or are there anecdotes referring to Cortez?
Yeah, he is a soldier anonymous who worked for Cortés. So he tells you stories about Cortés and he tells you stories about Malintzin, but you don't really know who he is. But he's a soldier of empire. He's a guy who came out here with a dream. In a way, you know, he's a very perverse type of immigrant. You know, he's like coming out here thinking the world is going to be his, and sadly, you know, for him, but wonderfully for the gods of cinema, he's able to have a whole different experience, you know, that shatters what he thinks, the world is all about. I see another question.
Yeah. Gabriel has another question. Let's pop that one up here. As the conquistador was coming to terms near the end of the film, I appreciate Señor at the Basilica telling him, "Te falta mucho que caminar," reminding him that reminding him and us that unlearning coloniality is an eternal process and must be intentional. Can you speak to your own unlearning process making this film?
Yes, absolutely, Gabby. Thank you for that question. I think that that's something I thought about from the very beginning. Like, how am I going to approach this story and not replicate, like the narratives of colonialism? How do we tell a story about the mindset of this person, but not make him a hero? How do I talk to the victims of violence about this story? And I learned so much, especially from that part of the process of being able to connect to the victims and to talk to them. And I realized that many of them suffered a great wall of silence about their stories, where they would talk and talk and give interviews to the press, but there was no actual listening happening. And I think it's only gotten worse for everyone involved in the film in terms of the disempowering of their voices. And so I realized that, in bringing the character into their lives, there was an opportunity for them to have this dialogue with power. And the most amazing thing about that was that none of the folks in the film came at it with anger, with any rancor. It was like they had suffered and they had processed what happened to them to a degree of understanding the value of telling the truth and the value of this kind of conversation. And we would talk with some of the characters about like what happened in South Africa, like after apartheid fell and they had their Truth and Reconciliation Committee, and how important it was to tell the truth and to be heard also by the power of that country. And I think Mexico's in a very similar place. Right now, like, stats say that 10 women are murdered every day in Mexico through feminicide. I talked to Fatima's mom, and she's now going on year like 6 of her fight for justice. And like, there's this dialogue that needs to happen, and in a way the film was able to fit into that. And just to the other part of your question about the man, when he goes to see the Virgin of Guadalupe, and there's a man who's like, "Hey, bro, you got to get up and keep going." It was fascinating because that man was actually, he had walked all night to come and ask for forgiveness for his own, his own, I guess I would say his own sins, and that he felt were burdening him. And he shared those with me privately in trust, and he said, "I understand what this guy is dealing with, because I'm dealing with it too, and I understand that we come here, but this isn't the end of our journey. I have work to do, and I will have to work at what I'm trying to get over for the rest of my life." And I think that was just amazing, because it was just like randomly we met him, and immediately it clicked on so many levels. And I think like, for me, seeing him on his knees also just shows that there's like this level of just basic humanity that even someone like him has. And that he also is going on a journey, and we don't want to share that journey with him. We want to dismantle a lot of the things that he represents, but at the same time, we also have to learn to exercise him, and like process him in a way, because he's not going to just magically disappear, right? And I think that's kind of the reality of Mexico, right? Like, we are incredibly touched by our colonial history. It's a deep part of Mexican identity. So we need to process that, and figure out how to, like, live in a better world with all of that.
I guess the conversation that's uncomfortable to have is people that try to fix the problems based on the you know, the pains that are happening, the symptoms that society is showing, versus trying to get to the root problem, or like you said, taking a look at the past and really saying how these last 500 years have been compounded to get us to this point. Is there is do you think that the that's one of the purposes of the film, to sort of start that dialogue, start that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. For me, when I started doing the research on the path that Cortez took, I realized that once I focused on violence, like every stop along the way had one of these issues, and I couldn't fit all of the ones that are present. But you know, like it's an X-ray of where the country is at and compared to where it was, right? And so you wonder, if the Spanish left in 1821, why have things continued to happen this way? Why is there still like a cycle of violence? Why is violence still currency, right? Why is it so cheap to commit some of these atrocious acts that you see in the film? And I think that question points to the present. It points to actions that need to happen today. And I think that's what decolonizing is all about. You know, and I think, sadly right now, from leadership in Mexico, what we're seeing is a conversation around the conquista that is very like ultra patriotic and symbolic. It's not critical, you know, and it's a lot of gestures that don't really do anything for people who are suffering violence today, and that connection is not being made. And I want the film to make that connection, so that when we think about this anniversary, it's uncomfortable and it forces us to confront this reality. It's too much.
The stories, and the unflinching nature of how you tell them, don't they don't you don't give us resolutions. You tell the story and you move on to the next story. And then you said that you stayed friends with some of these people. Have any of them, and I guess we talked a little bit about how the actual filming process affected them. But since that, have any of them gained a little bit more closure? Are there any positives that have come out of it, post them, or is it just more of the same in their lives?
I think they have all like continued on their journey of resistance and maturity. Um, have their cases been resolved? No. I think none of them have actually been resolved. But at the same time, they're leading the way, for a different kind of country, a different Mexico, and a different way of imagining what justice means, even if it takes whatever it takes. You know. And I think that's the big challenge that we have when we tell these stories, because I could go around and try to find that one story where somebody did get justice, like somebody did hunt down the killers or the guilty people. But that's just not the experience of like 99% of people who are victims of violence. So at the same time, it's a decision that you make as a director of like how much are you going to represent the true experience of people.
Yeah, there was and I think to your point, there was, I think, an article or a story. I don't know if it was Newsweek or BuzzFeed or something, that it was like a few months ago, that was like, Mexican mother tracks down and murders like six different members of the gang that killed her daughter, or something like that. And as you said, that's one out of 5,000, right? That's the Hollywoodization of real people's trauma and feminicide, and all these, things that are happening, that continue to happen. So I guess they're interested in that story because of clickbait, I guess, right?
Within a couple weeks, that story that you're talking about was bought by a Hollywood studio.
Wow.
And that's I get that. I mean, those movies can be really fun, but the truth is, when you have the numbers that are coming out of impoverished communities in Mexico that are constantly victimized by violence, like, who am I to come in and say, well, let me pick the one story where we all feel good at the end, and we can eat popcorn and go home, and love each other. That's just not the experience of any of the people that I met, and I want to honor them in that way. because I don't want to be contributing to erasing them by tweaking or finding solutions. It's a big problem, and that's just the way it is. That's the truth. It's complicated, and we all kind of have to confront that in our own way.
And Scarlett Johansson's going to play the mom. Um, obviously, sorry, low hanging fruit. I gotta throw the jokes in once in a while since we're talking about such a serious movie. Rodrigo, I mean, is there a comedy in your future? Is there something like a horror movie or something else? I mean, I understand that, and again, that's just my perspective because I don't. I always tell people I don't make the important Latino films. I make comedies because I think it's important to laugh, right? And I think for every one of your movies, there should be one of mine where people can just kind of unflinch. But do you feel that's ingrained in you to sort of tell these unflinching stories and to sort of make people uncomfortable? Do you feel that there's a point where you will have told enough of them to move on to something else, or is this just your art and it's just what you're feeling at the moment and the kind of stories that you want to tell and share?
I just fall in love with certain movies, certain stories. Like the next project I'm working on is about my friendship with a guy from Colima who's incarcerated and doing life without parole. I've been his friend for 10 years, and we made a movie together. In a way, we've collaborated by letter over on a movie, and then I'm also really interested in the stories that really kind of like obsess me and like keep me up at night. Like right now I've been thinking a lot about the unaccompanied crisis that's happening on the border. Um, so I feel like I just have to go with the flow of what I fall in love with, and maybe one day I will fall in love with a comedy. I think a horror movie is probably coming sooner because
Okay.
it's not that far from some of the stories I've told. But yeah, like I look for that, like falling in love with a project. That's my main mark. I don't think about the genre or anything. I just want to go with something that obsesses me and creates a lot of passion so that I can survive the 5 to 10 years it takes to make a movie.
Yeah, I've been lucky enough as somebody who's supporting the festival to do a lot of interviews with a lot of documentarians over the last couple of years, and what they say is that the project picks you. You're just kind of wandering around in a daze until you read a story or you hear about something or something hits you in the face and you're like, okay, this is it. Is it like love at first sight? Does it become like your instant muse, your instant obsession?
Well, I mean, there's a decision to jump into making a movie, and then comes the pain, right? Like especially with documentaries, then comes the pain. And I see a question from Gabby about is there a movie in Merced about Merced in the future? And I actually made one that I think played at SD Latino a few years ago called Lupe Under the Sun. And Lupe Under the Sun is entirely shot in Merced. Merced is a town in Central California where I grew up between there and Mexico, and that's where Gabby and I met in high school, actually. So yeah, I made a movie there about my grandpa who was a bracero and who worked the fields way back in the 60s and 70s.
Nice. Um, and then we're live here with Rodrigo from the film 499 at San Diego Latino Film Festival. I guess the second part of my question would be, and after being a part of the festival and seeing this incredible amount of talent, both from narrative, documentary, shorts, musicals, animation, horror, everything from Central America, South America, you know, Netflix spends several $100,000 to figure out that only 0.9% of their programming or industry programming features or is for or is kind of geared towards Latino, and a great percentage of that is, like you said, the movies that they make about Colombians are, yet another Pablo Escobar story, another Narco series, things like that. Um, so what is the element or the thing that's needed from this obvious amount of talent to actually pushing it so that it's more widely distributed, so that you and I get to tell more stories with larger budgets that get out to more audiences? Is it just banging down the doors and just keeping going through this festival circuits? Is What do you feel is the barrier that's stopping what is an obvious amount of talent from getting representation and getting distribution?
I think a lot of it just has to do with like folks look at our stories and they start doubting because they never lived them, and someone else might come from a more like central or let's just say it white perspective, white male perspective, and then people get excited about it because they recognize it. I think we just have to be persistent, and there's lots of ways to push forward. Some folks really want to be validated by the big industry, and that's fine. And other folks just want to work in the art house space. I think what does have to happen, regardless, is like we need to encourage our artists to just follow their passion. Our filmmakers, like let them feel the love, even if we're not able to change like their circumstances and give them $1 million check. Like that love and that support creates a lot of resilience for folks up and down, and I think when I see friends who have a successful film like nominated to an Oscar or whatever, like I'm proud of them and I'm excited for them, and they're excited for me too, and we all need a little bit of a push, to keep going on our journeys. So I think audiences in that sense are like key, just to kind of show us that it matters and that you love our work. That keeps us going.
Something that came up, and this is one of my final questions for you, since we've had you almost an hour here, Rodrigo. Something that came up in our recap stream the other night was this question of breaking through the door, or getting a chance to be a showrunner or a director on a larger scale, and then picking who you lift up around you, right? And I gave the example of a Latina showrunner that was staffing a comedy show, and she was putting stuff out there saying, "I need, I want to have a diversified. I want an Afro Latina writer. Send me your. I want this. I want that. I want that." And I was like, "Hey, raising my hand, and the response was, we already have two Latino writers," which is something that I don't think has ever been said in any sitcom writing room about having too many white writers. Right? There's never been a comedy room that we're like, "Oh yeah, we got too many 45-year-old white dudes. We got too many of those," right? So we get the chance. We're running a show, but we're trying to do the thing that they never did for us, right? We're trying to do it the right way, even though they never did it right for us. How do you feel in terms of that sort of general question?
I mean, I feel like it's if you have any power, you acquire any power, any decision making power, you should be aware of these situations, and the decisions are personal. You have to live with them, right? And there might be different reasons for those choices, but you have to tackle the questions. You can't ignore them because otherwise you're doing exactly the same thing that people have criticized the industry forever of, like just being blind and comfortable, right? So I personally like try to like think, Pan American wise, like so for with 499 I was thinking of working with someone in Chile because not only is Andrea's talent amazing, but she also like understands enough of Latin American history, but is also insider outsider. She's not Mexican, she doesn't have like a clear strong point of view on that history, but she understands the history of the continent, and so she pushed me, right? So I always look for those points of value and to kind of uplift those values that people bring on the team, and really appreciate like that diversity because it feeds so much energy, to the projects. And so with each project there's kind of like a different combination of those roles, but I always try to think about all of these issues, and not try to think about it in a way of like what's safe or no, but really what does the film really need? And luckily for me that my films need that diversity. They really are nourished by it.
To your point, one of the documentaries that I saw this year was Truly Texas Mexican, which was about northeastern Mexico, southern Texas cuisine, and how it's the indigenous population that that became and started acting Mexican for survival. And they brought in a director and a cinematographer from Uruguay that gave them like a fresh perspective while still being Latinos, and it gave them a fresh perspective into kind of like an outlook. So I guess you want somebody that might, to add sort of to that diversity, somebody that's close but not too close to the story, that can give it, that can kind of look at it from fresh eyes, or that doesn't have all that built-in sort of predisposition, right?
Yeah, it's all about the relationship. Like the relationship, it's it isn't about like only certain people can tell certain stories, you know, like and you have to have lived every story. It's about your relationship. Are you coming at it with an authentic, empowering relationship to that story? Are you listening to all the context? Like if you're gonna go and tell a story about, like for instance this year, Nomadland, right? It's a film about like the failure of the U.S. economy, and it's told by a Chinese American born in China, right? And who came out and like she knew how to uplift the stories of folks who are homeless living in their cars, right? But she really worked really hard on that, and I see that happening all across the board with filmmaking. A lot of my friends like when they go out and they try to make a film about, for instance, like undocumented like youth that are trying to go to college, or stories about like migrants like crossing Europe, like they haven't specifically lived that reality, but they are grappling and wrestling with that connection and working to empower the story and to really like challenge themselves as they make it. So I think that's what we have to constantly do. We have to question, why is this person here on the team? Why are we telling the story this way? All these questions have to be there so that we can really like represent ourselves in the best way.
And I, for one, am truly appreciative of you for showcasing this film at the festival. It blew my mind. I had to watch it twice to really absorb it. And I think anybody that hasn't watched it should definitely seek it out here, or eventually where it finds a home later on. So Rodrigo, and as somebody who's now, I've made two features and a dozen short narrative films, and then I'm trying to dip my feet into the documentary market. These conversations and just being a part of the festival with filmmakers like yours, I'm trying to learn as much and listen as much as I can. So I appreciate the fact that you took time to talk with us tonight.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to speak with you, Luis, and I hope to see you soon at a live version of the festival coming up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Next time, let's both premiere our next films at the San Diego Latino Film Festival. Let's do that in person, and we can have a burrito and talk about film and
I
life.
remembered the place. It's called Pokies.
Oh, Pokies. Oh, there you go. That's a landmark, man.
There
That's
you
a
go.
landmark. I gotta go to like Castañedas or Roberta's or something. Depends. Well, my company's called 2 a.m. Burrito. That's the silly name of my production company, which is a uniquely San Diego thing. You get done with partying or filming, you go home, you get a burrito at 2 in the morning. So that's where that comes in. So I appreciate it, man. Thank you, everybody that chimed in. You can
Yeah.
still go to get tickets at Eventive. To get tickets, you can rent the movie tonight. Wake up tomorrow. You have all day to watch it as well. You can also watch my movie Oscar Story, part of the Frontera documentary series as well. You can that screened earlier today. So thank you everybody for tuning in. Thank you, Rodrigo.
Thank you,
Hopefully
Luis.
we'll talk soon, and everybody have a good night.